Late one warm evening in a quiet southern town, a young woman named Alana drove home after finishing her late shift at a local diner. The air outside was still heavy with the smell of fried food that clung to her uniform, and her body ached from standing all day. She had her window halfway down, letting the night breeze touch her face as she hummed softly to the tune of an old song playing on the radio. The roads were nearly empty, just the soft glow of streetlights and the sound of crickets singing in the distance. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't distracted. She was just tired and ready to rest. But then out of nowhere, flashing blue and red lights lit up behind her car. Her heart jumped. She checked her speedometer again. She was under the limit. Still, she pulled over slowly to the side of the road just as she'd been taught. For a moment, she sat still with her hands on the steering wheel. The flashing lights painted her face in colors that made her stomach twist. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. "It's probably just a misunderstanding," she whispered quietly. A tall police officer stepped out of his car and began walking toward her vehicle. His face was serious, his expression unreadable under the brim of his hat. His flashlight shone directly into her window, blinding her for a second. "Evening, officer," she said softly, rolling the window down further. "License and registration," he said, his voice firm and clipped, not even offering a greeting. Alana blinked, startled by his tone. "Sure," she replied, reaching slowly into her bag on the passenger seat. She moved carefully, aware of every motion, because she had heard stories. People who made the wrong move, who reached too fast, who didn't make it home. She handed over her documents. The officer didn't look at her right away. He examined the ID, shining his flashlight over it before giving her a suspicious glance. "You know why I pulled you over?" he asked. "No, sir," she said quietly. "Was I going too fast?" He shook his head slowly. "Your taillight's out." She blinked, confused. "It is? I didn't know that." "I can get it fixed tomorrow morning." "Step out of the car," he interrupted. Her voice faltered. "Excuse me." "I said, step out of the car." There was no reason given, no explanation. Her heart started to pound. She hesitated, but the sharpness in his eyes told her that arguing wasn't an option. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out slowly, keeping her hands visible. The air felt colder now. The road was empty, and the sound of cicadas filled the silence between them. She could feel the officer's gaze heavy on her as she stood there, confused. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Home, sir." "Just got off work," she answered. He walked around the car, shining his flashlight inside. "You live around here?" "Yes, about 10 minutes away." He paused by the trunk as if looking for something. "You been drinking tonight?" "No, sir." "I don't drink." He circled back toward her. "You seem nervous." Alana gave a small, uneasy laugh. "It's late and I've never been pulled over before. I'm just a little shaken, that's all." The officer didn't smile. He kept staring, as though trying to find a reason not to believe her. After a moment, he called into his radio, murmuring something she couldn't make out. The minutes dragged. Alana shifted from foot to foot, feeling the fatigue in her legs. She thought about her husband waiting at home, probably wondering why she was late. She reached for her phone in her pocket. "Don't move," the officer barked suddenly. Her hand froze. "I was just going to call my husband." "Put your hands where I can see them," he ordered. His voice was louder now, sharper. She lifted her hands, palms open, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Okay, I'm not doing anything wrong." Another police car appeared in the distance, its lights flashing as it pulled in behind the first. Two more officers stepped out, talking quietly among themselves as they approached. Alana's confusion deepened. Why were there more officers for a broken taillight? The first officer, the one who'd pulled her over, spoke to the others in a low tone, his eyes flicking toward her from time to time. She caught bits and pieces of their conversation but couldn't make out full sentences. The younger of the two new officers seemed uncertain, glancing at her with a look that almost resembled pity. "Ma'am," the first officer said finally, "we're going to search your vehicle." "Search my why? You said it was just a taillight," she replied, her voice trembling. "Standard procedure," he said. "You can stand over here while we check." "But you don't have a reason." He stepped closer. "Are you refusing?" Alana shook her head quickly, afraid of making things worse. "No, sir, I'm not refusing. I just don't understand." He took that as permission and gestured to one of the other officers. They began to look through her car, opening the doors and glove compartment. The sound of papers rustling filled the air. Every second felt heavier than the last. As she stood there on the side of the road, a car passed by slowly, the driver glancing at the scene before driving off again. Alana felt exposed, like the whole world could see her standing there, tired and scared, but no one would stop to help. After several long minutes, one of the officers said quietly, "Nothing here." The lead officer frowned, clearly disappointed. He looked back at Alana, his voice hard. "Next time, fix your car before you drive at night." She wanted to say something, to ask why he had treated her like that, why he made her feel like a criminal for doing nothing wrong. But the words wouldn't come out. Her throat felt tight. "Can I go now?" she asked softly. He gave a short nod, waving her off like she was an annoyance. She turned and walked back to her car, her hands still trembling as she opened the door. Before she could start the engine, she heard him speak again. "You might want to watch your attitude next time, ma'am. Some officers aren't as patient as I am." She didn't respond. She just looked at him for a brief second, the flashing lights reflecting in her tired eyes, and then she drove off slowly into the night. The rest of the drive home was a blur. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she tried to process what had just happened. She hadn't shouted, hadn't disobeyed, hadn't done anything wrong, but still she had felt powerless, as if the air itself had turned against her. When she finally pulled into her driveway, she sat in the car for a long moment, the engine still running. Her house lights were on, and the sight of them gave her a small sense of relief. She could finally breathe again. Inside, the familiar scent of her home greeted her, soft lavender and the faint smell of coffee from the morning. She walked to the mirror in the hallway and stared at her reflection. Her eyes looked tired, her face pale under the dim light. She brushed her fingers through her hair and let out a shaky breath. She told herself it was over, that it was just a bad night, that tomorrow things would be normal again. But deep down something felt wrong, something she couldn't quite name. The way the officer had looked at her, the way he had spoken. It lingered in her mind like a cold shadow. As she got ready for bed, she tried not to think about it. She set her phone on the nightstand and climbed under the blanket, hoping sleep would wash away the unease. But the flashing lights from earlier replayed in her mind, over and over. The sound of the officer's voice echoed faintly, blending with the hum of the ceiling fan. She closed her eyes and told herself to breathe. Outside, the night was still. The world seemed calm again. But the silence felt different now, heavier, uncertain, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The next morning came with sunlight spilling through the curtains, soft and golden. Alana woke up later than usual, her body still heavy from the night before. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes and trying to shake off the memory of the flashing lights and the officer's cold stare. Her husband was already gone for work, but he had left her a note on the kitchen table that said, "Hope you slept well. Breakfast is in the fridge. See you later, love." She smiled faintly at the note, but her mind couldn't rest. The events from last night kept replaying piece by piece. She made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the small street outside come to life. Kids were walking to school. An older man was watering his plants, and the mail truck rolled down the block. Everything looked normal, but Alana didn't feel normal. She decided to check her taillight, the reason she had been stopped. She walked outside and crouched behind her car. The light was perfectly fine. Not cracked, not broken, not out. It worked perfectly when she tested it. Her stomach dropped. So it wasn't about the taillight at all. She stood there for a moment, the morning breeze brushing against her skin. The thought made her uneasy. She had done nothing wrong, yet she had been treated like she had. The more she thought about it, the more it bothered her. She knew she couldn't let it go, not entirely, but she also didn't want to start trouble. Her husband had always told her to stay calm and avoid conflict, especially with people in power. That day at work, she tried her best to stay cheerful. The diner was busy with the usual crowd, and her coworkers chatted around her, laughing about small things. But her mind kept drifting. Every time a police car drove by outside, she froze for just a second, her hands tightening around the coffee pot. "Hey, you okay?" her coworker asked. Alana forced a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." By evening, she finally felt a little better. She told herself she would move on. Maybe it was just one bad officer having a bad night. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. She clocked out, said goodbye, and started her drive home again. The road was quiet, just like the night before. She turned on the radio to fill the silence. But as she drove down the same stretch of highway, she noticed something in her rearview mirror. Headlights following closely behind. At first, she didn't think much of it. But when the car stayed behind her through 2 turns, her chest tightened. Then the flashing lights came on again. Her hands went cold. Not again. She slowed down and pulled over carefully, her breath quickening. When the door of the police car opened, she saw the same officer step out, the same one from last night. Her heart sank. He walked toward her car with that same expression, half stern, half irritated. "Evening again," he said flatly. "You remember me?" Alana gripped the steering wheel. "Yes, sir. You pulled me over last night." He nodded slowly. "That's right." "I did?" He leaned slightly toward her window. "Mind telling me where you're headed this time?" "I just finished work. I'm going home." He studied her face for a moment, then glanced at her car. "Step out for me." Her pulse raced. "Sir, I don't understand." "What's wrong?" "Step out," he repeated, louder this time. She hesitated, then slowly opened the door and stepped outside. The cool air brushed against her arms, and she wrapped them around herself without thinking. The officer walked around the car again, shining his flashlight inside even though the streetlight nearby gave plenty of light. "Where do you work?" he asked suddenly. "At the diner off Main Street," she replied quietly. "Do you live alone?" "No, I live with my husband." He looked at her again, his eyes narrow. "You seem nervous," Alana swallowed hard. "I told you last night, this is just uncomfortable for me. I don't know what I've done wrong." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer and said, "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Her heart skipped. "What? Who?"
"Just stay still," he said.
"We're checking something." Another police car arrived again, just like the night before. This time it was a younger officer behind the wheel. He stepped out slowly, glancing at Alana with a confused look. It was clear he didn't understand why they were there either. The older officer spoke to him in a low voice. Alana couldn't hear everything, but she caught a few words: suspicious, questioning, and procedure. The younger one looked uneasy. "Sir, I don't think—" "Do your job," the older one cut in sharply. The younger officer fell silent. Alana stood there under the harsh light, her hands trembling. Every sound around her, the buzzing street lamp, the distant hum of a passing truck, seemed painfully loud. She just wanted to go home. "Can I please call my husband?" she asked softly. The officer didn't answer at first. Then, with a tone that felt more like a warning than permission, he said, "Make it quick." She reached for her phone carefully, dialing her husband's number with shaky fingers. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again, her voice quiet. "He's not answering." "Then you wait," the officer said. The younger cop shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Alana again. "Sir, maybe we should just verify her ID and let her go." The older one ignored him. He leaned against his patrol car, staring at Alana like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't figure out. Minutes passed. The silence was thick and Alana's mind raced. Why was this happening again? She hadn't done anything. Was it because of how she looked? Or because she had questioned him last night? Finally, the radio on his shoulder crackled. Someone spoke through it, but Alana couldn't hear what was said. The officer nodded once, then turned to her. "You're free to go," he said coldly. She blinked in disbelief. "That's it?" "That's it," he repeated. "You can go." Alana got back into her car, her hands trembling as she gripped the wheel. She didn't even look back as she drove away, though she could feel his eyes on her the entire time. When she got home, her husband was waiting at the door. He saw her pale face and hurried to her side. "What happened?" She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. It was him again. The same officer. "He stopped me again tonight." Her husband's expression darkened. "What, did he say why?" She shook her head. "No, he said I matched a description, but he wouldn't say what that meant. He just kept staring at me." He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You shouldn't be out there alone at night for a while," he said. "I'll talk to someone about this tomorrow." Alana nodded, though she wasn't sure what good that would do. She felt small, helpless, like something was happening that she couldn't control. Later that night, as she lay in bed, her husband already asleep beside her, she stared at the ceiling. Every shadow in the room reminded her of that flashlight beam. Every sound outside made her flinch. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, "Why me?" The next few days passed slowly. She went to work, tried to smile, tried to act like everything was fine. But she noticed things. A police car parked down the street one morning, the same car driving past her workplace twice in an hour. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Her co-workers noticed her quietness, but she didn't tell them. She didn't want to be seen as dramatic or paranoid, but inside she knew something wasn't right. The way that officer had looked at her, it wasn't about a taillight or any description. It was something else. Each night she checked her locks twice, sometimes 3 times. The hum of her husband's breathing beside her was the only thing that helped her sleep at all, but deep down she could feel it, that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much bigger, something she didn't understand yet, but that was already unfolding quietly around her, and though she didn't know it, the next time she would see that officer would change everything. The morning began quietly, but there was a heaviness in the air that Alana couldn't shake. It had been 3 days since the second stop, yet her thoughts hadn't settled. She went about her routine like normal, made coffee, watered the plants, and tried to keep her mind busy. But every time she caught her reflection in the kitchen window, she saw the same worry in her eyes. Her husband had promised to speak to someone at the department that day. He didn't tell her exactly who, but she trusted him. He worked closely with local officials and had always handled problems calmly. Still, she couldn't help feeling nervous. The officer who had stopped her twice didn't seem like the kind of man who would back down easily. Later that morning, she went to the diner. The customers were their usual mix. Tired workers grabbing breakfast and families starting their day. She smiled, took orders, and poured coffee, doing her best to push the anxiety aside. But as the hours passed, she noticed a police car parked across the street. It had been there since she arrived. Every time she glanced out the window, she saw the same shape, the same car, sitting there, engine idling. Her heart would skip, and she'd quickly look away, pretending to refill someone's cup or wipe a counter. When she stepped outside on her break, she saw that the car was empty, but it still sat there, the sunlight glinting off the badge decal on the side. She stood there for a while, pretending to check her phone, wondering if she was imagining things. Maybe it wasn't even him. Maybe it was just another officer doing his job, but deep down she knew. When she got home that evening, her husband was pacing near the kitchen table. His face was serious, the kind of serious that made her heart drop. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her bag. He looked up at her and said quietly, "I talked to the department." "And?" He hesitated. "The officer who stopped you, he's new to the precinct. They said he's been overly strict with a few people lately. They're going to look into it." Alana frowned. "That's it? Just look into it?" He sighed. "They said unless there's proof of misconduct, they can't take action." Her chest tightened. "So what am I supposed to do? Wait until he stops me again?" He stepped closer, taking her hand gently. "You won't be alone. I'll make sure of that." She wanted to believe him, and for a few days things seemed calm again. No strange cars followed her. No flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She started to breathe normally again, thinking maybe it was over. But one Friday night when the diner was closing, Alana stayed a little later to help clean up. It was quiet inside, only the soft clinking of dishes and the hum of the neon sign outside. When she stepped out to throw the trash in the dumpster, she noticed a police car parked across the street once more. Her hands froze on the trash lid. The window of the patrol car rolled down just enough for her to see a pair of eyes watching her. A chill ran through her. She quickly went back inside, locking the door behind her. Her co-worker, who was sweeping, noticed her pale face. "Everything okay?" Alana forced a small nod. "Yeah, just thought I saw someone outside." By the time they finished closing up, the police car was gone. But the unease stayed with her all the way home. The next morning, her husband decided to go into work early. Alana stayed home to rest. She was folding laundry when there was a loud knock on the door. She froze, peeking through the curtain. She saw a familiar uniform, the same officer. Her stomach turned, but she opened the door halfway, keeping the screen door closed. "Good morning, officer."
Can I help you?
He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning. I just wanted to follow up on a report. Do you mind if I come in for a moment?" Alana frowned. "A report? I didn't file anything." He tilted his head slightly. "Maybe your husband did?" She hesitated, unsure of what to do. Every instinct told her to keep the door closed. "He's not home right now," she said softly. The officer nodded, but his gaze shifted past her, looking inside the house as if searching for something. "I won't take long." "I think it's better if you come back when he's here," she said, her voice steady but nervous. For a moment, their eyes met, her quiet firmness against his cold stare. Then, after a pause, he gave a short nod. "All right then. Tell him I stopped by." She watched as he walked back to his car, the sound of his boots echoing on the driveway. The moment he drove away, she locked every door in the house and sat down on the couch, her hands trembling. When her husband came home later, she told him everything. His jaw tightened as she spoke. "He came to our house?" "Yes, said he wanted to follow up." Her husband shook his head. "That's not procedure. He has no reason to come here." He immediately picked up the phone and made a call. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to someone on the other end. Alana couldn't hear every word, but she could tell he was demanding answers. When he hung up, he looked at her with a mix of anger and concern. "I spoke to the chief," he said. "He promised to handle it personally. You won't have to see that man again." Alana nodded, but the fear didn't fade. She wanted to believe the problem was solved, yet something deep inside told her this wasn't the end. That night, she dreamed of flashing lights again, only this time, they weren't behind her car. They were everywhere, surrounding her. She woke up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the sound of her husband's steady breathing next to her the only comfort she had. The next few days went by quietly. She went to work, kept her head down, and tried to pretend everything was fine. But one evening, as she left the diner, 2 officers she didn't recognize were waiting by the door. "Are you Alana?" one of them asked. "Yes," she said cautiously. "We've been asked to bring you in for questioning. Just a few routine questions, ma'am." Her first thought was of her husband. "Questioning? About what?" "Just need a few minutes of your time," the taller one said politely. They didn't seem hostile, and she didn't want to cause a scene, so she nodded. "Can I at least call my husband to let him know?" "Of course," the officer said. She called, but it went to voicemail. She left a quick message, trying to sound calm. "Hey, they're asking me to come down to the station for a few questions." "I'll be home soon." The officers led her to the car. The ride was silent, and Alana stared out the window, feeling a strange mix of confusion and worry. When they arrived at the station, she noticed how quiet the building was. Only a few people were there, and the main hall lights were dimmed. "Just wait here," one officer said, guiding her to a small room. She sat down, her hands resting on her lap. The room was plain, and a table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner. After a few minutes, the door opened. The officer from before stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. "You again?" she said quietly. He gave a small smile. "Didn't expect to see me? I thought this was just questioning." "It is," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "You've been mentioned in a case we're reviewing." She frowned. "I don't understand." He leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to. Just answer a few things and we'll be done." His tone was calm, but something about the way he looked at her made her uneasy. She answered his questions, all harmless things about her car, her job, her route home. But each answer seemed to make him more impatient. After about 15 minutes, he stood. "That's all for now," she nodded quickly. "Can I go?" He opened the door and the younger officer from earlier appeared. "Take her home," the man said. As she walked out, Alana felt a mix of relief and confusion. She didn't understand what had just happened, but she was grateful to be leaving. When she got outside, the air felt different. Heavy, cold, almost still. At home, she told her husband everything again. He listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said quietly, "This is bigger than it seems. I'm going to make sure this stops for good." That night, Alana sat by the window looking out at the quiet street. A streetlight flickered across the road, and in the faint reflection on the glass, she saw her own face, tired, scared, but still strong. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but one thing was certain. Something in that town had started to shift, and her life would never be the same again. The sun rose quietly that morning, painting the sky in pale shades of gold and orange. Alana sat at the kitchen table, her cup of coffee untouched. Her husband was on the phone in the next room, speaking in a tone she had never heard from him before, low, serious, and edged with anger. The night before had left her shaken. The visit to the police station, the strange questioning, the officer's cold stare, it all played over and over in her mind. She had barely slept, and now even the sound of the morning birds outside felt distant. Her husband finally ended the call and walked over. His expression was calm, but there was tension in his shoulders. "I talked to the sheriff's office," he said. "They're looking into what happened. They're pulling the footage from the station." She looked up at him, her voice small. "Do you think they'll do anything about it?" He hesitated. "They will. They have to." He didn't tell her everything, but she could see in his eyes that he knew more than he was saying. He had always been protective of her, but now it was more than that. There was a quiet determination in him, like he was preparing for a battle. The morning passed slowly. Alana stayed home, trying to keep herself busy with small chores. She watered the plants, folded laundry, wiped the counters even though they were already clean. But her mind kept drifting to that same thought. Why had that officer targeted her? What did he want? Around noon, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her husband. "Stay home. Don't open the door for anyone until I get back." Her chest tightened. She typed back quickly, "What's going on?" He replied a minute later, "I'll explain when I get there. Just stay inside." She locked the doors, drew the curtains, and sat on the couch staring at the clock. Each tick of the second hand felt louder than the last. An hour passed. Then another. The house felt too quiet, too still. She tried to distract herself by turning on the TV, but she couldn't focus on anything. Her mind kept returning to that last message. Finally, she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. She rushed to the window, peeking through the curtain. It was her husband's truck. Relief washed over her. She opened the door as he stepped in, his face set in a look of grim focus. "What happened?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "They found something," he said. "There's body camera footage from your time at the station." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean, footage?" He sat down at the table, looking straight at her. "The officer who questioned you, he broke several rules. The camera caught how he treated you. The sheriff saw it this morning." Alana blinked, unsure how to react. "The sheriff? What did he say?" Her husband's expression softened for a moment. He was furious. He said it was unacceptable. "The officer's been suspended while they investigate." She let out a shaky breath. It was the first good news she'd heard in days. But even as relief filled her, there was still something unsettling about the whole situation. "Do you think it's over?" she asked quietly. "I hope so," he said, "but I want to make sure. I'm going down there myself later. The sheriff wants to talk to me directly." Alana nodded, though she didn't understand why her husband was so involved. He seemed to know people at the department, people who listened when he spoke. She assumed it had something to do with his work, though he rarely talked about the details. That evening, after he left, Alana sat alone in the living room. The setting sun painted long shadows across the floor, and the hum of cicadas filled the air. She tried to read, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. Then, not long after dark, headlights flashed across the window. Her heart jumped. She walked to the door carefully and peeked out. It wasn't her husband's truck this time. It was another car, unmarked but familiar. She froze. The same officer from before was sitting inside, parked across the street. Her hands shook as she stepped back from the window. Why was he there? Wasn't he suspended? Her mind raced. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe she was imagining it. But deep down she knew she wasn't. She tried calling her husband, but the call didn't go through. She tried again, still nothing. For nearly an hour the car sat there. The officer didn't move, didn't get out, just watched the house from the shadows. When her husband finally returned, the car sped off. Alana ran to the door the moment he stepped inside. "He was here," she said quickly. "That officer, he was parked outside for almost an hour." Her husband's face went still. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I saw him." He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and made another call. His voice was sharp now, each word clipped. "This needs to end tonight," he said. "I want him off the street immediately." When he hung up, Alana asked in a trembling voice, "Who did you call?" "The sheriff," he said simply. "He's on his way to the station right now." Alana frowned. "You can just call him like that?" Her husband looked at her for a long moment. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. She waited. Her breath held. "I didn't want to involve you in this," he said, "but you deserve to know the truth. The sheriff is me." For a moment the world seemed to stop. She stared at him, trying to process what she'd just heard. "You're what?" He nodded slowly. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to keep you safe. I didn't want you to see the things I see every day. But now after what happened, I can't hide it anymore." Alana felt lightheaded. Her husband, the sheriff? It made sense now. The calls, the connections, the way the department had reacted so quickly. "You're the sheriff," she repeated softly. He reached for her hand. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought I was protecting you. But that officer crossed a line that he'll never cross again." She looked down at their joined hands, her mind spinning. "He didn't know, did he?" She whispered. "He didn't know who I was?" "No," her husband said, his voice quiet but firm. "And that's why he's in serious trouble now." Alana sat back stunned. All this time she'd been terrified and powerless, not realizing the person she came home to every night was the highest authority in town. "What's going to happen to him?" she asked after a long pause. Her husband's jaw tightened. "The investigation will be handled by the state. I've already stepped aside to avoid conflict of interest, but I've made it clear that I expect full accountability." Alana nodded slowly, still trying to take it all in. The fear she had felt for days began to mix with something else, a quiet strength. For the first time, she felt like the situation was no longer out of her control. Later that night, they sat together on the porch. The air was cool and the stars hung quietly above them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alana said softly, "All this time I thought I was just unlucky, that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Her husband looked at her, his eyes full of regret. "You were never in the wrong, Alana. The system failed you. But I promise it won't again." She believed him. Inside, the house felt calm again, the air lighter somehow. Still, when she went to bed, she couldn't help but think about the officer's face, the cold expression, the way he looked at her like she was less than human. She didn't know what would happen next. But she did know one thing. The truth was finally out. The man who had treated her so cruelly had no idea who he was dealing with. And now every action, every word, every moment would come to light. As she drifted to sleep, the world outside her window seemed quieter than it had in weeks. Somewhere, justice had already begun to turn its wheels, and though the road ahead might still be long, she knew she wouldn't be walking it alone. The morning after the truth came out, Alana woke up to the sound of her husband's phone buzzing nonstop. He stood by the window, already dressed in uniform, his badge catching the soft morning light. His face was calm, but there was a quiet storm behind his eyes. Alana sat up, still half dreaming, her mind replaying his words from the night before. Her husband, the sheriff, it still didn't feel real. She had lived beside him, loved him, shared everything with him. But she never knew the full truth of what he did every day, and now that secret had changed everything. He ended another call and turned toward her. "It's starting," he said softly. "What's starting?" "The investigation. The state sent in their team early this morning. They're reviewing everything, body cam footage, reports, the officer's record. It's going to be public soon." Alana's heart tightened. "Public? You mean everyone's going to know?" He nodded. "Yes, there's no stopping it now." She took a slow breath. The thought of everyone in town knowing what had happened to her made her stomach twist. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be the center of gossip. She just wanted peace. But she also knew that silence had protected that officer before, and she wasn't going to let that happen again. After her husband left for work, Alana sat alone in the kitchen. The TV was on in the background, but she wasn't really listening. She was thinking about the first night. The flashing lights, the fear, the humiliation. It all felt so long ago now, yet the memory still stung. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of her co-workers at the diner. "I saw your name on the news. Are you okay?" Her chest tightened. She grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. The local news anchor was talking about the ongoing investigation into police misconduct involving the sheriff's wife. They didn't use her full name, but anyone who knew her would know who they were talking about. The reporter went on, describing how footage had surfaced, showing the officer treating her unfairly and mishandling the arrest. They showed clips of protests forming outside the station, people holding signs demanding justice. Alana's hands trembled. This wasn't how she wanted her story told. She had never asked for attention, never wanted cameras or crowds, but now she was at the center of it all. By the time her husband returned that evening, the situation had exploded. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his eyes tired. "It's worse than I thought," he admitted, dropping his keys on the table. "There are reporters outside the courthouse, and half the town is talking about it. Some officers are angry, others are scared. Everyone's choosing sides," Alana frowned. "Sides? There shouldn't be sides. What happened was wrong." "I know," he said quietly, "but not everyone sees it that way. Some people don't want to admit the truth." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then make them see it." He looked at her, surprised by her firmness. "You've been through enough, Alana. You don't need to be part of this anymore." "I already am," she said softly, "whether I want to be or not." The next few days were a blur. Reporters came to their doorstep asking for statements. People she barely knew sent her messages, some kind, some cruel. She ignored most of them. But one morning she found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. For the first time in weeks, she saw not just fear, but strength staring back. When her husband came home that night, she told him what she'd decided. "I'm going to speak," she said. He blinked. "Speak to who?" "To the press. To the town. To whoever needs to hear it." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, people need to see that I'm not just a story on the news. I'm a person, and if they're going to talk about what happened, they should hear it from me." He studied her face, then slowly nodded. "All right, but I'll be there with you." 2 days later, they stood together at a press conference outside the sheriff's office. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. Alana's heart raced as she stepped up to the microphone. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, and began to speak. Her voice was calm but full of emotion. She talked about that first night, the fear she felt, the confusion, the way she was treated like she didn't matter. She didn't mention the officer's name. She didn't need to. She just told the truth. "I'm not here to attack anyone," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because no one should ever feel powerless for simply existing. I want my story to remind people that respect isn't something you earn through fear. It's something we owe to each other as human beings." The crowd was silent. Even the reporters lowered their microphones for a moment. When she finished, she stepped back, her husband's hand resting gently on her shoulder. The next morning, her words were everywhere. People shared her speech online, calling her brave, strong, and graceful. But not everyone saw it that way. Some accused her of using her husband's position to gain attention. Others claimed she exaggerated the story. The noise was constant, but Alana refused to let it break her. Her husband, meanwhile, faced his own storm. Inside the department, tensions were high. Some officers quit in protest, saying the sheriff had turned against his own. Others supported him, saying it was time for real change. At home, Alana could see the weight on his shoulders growing heavier each day. He hardly slept. He spent hours on the phone, trying to balance justice with leadership. But no matter how tired he was, he never let his frustration show around her. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. The air was still and the crickets sang softly in the grass. Finally, he said, "You change things, you know." Alana looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "People are listening now. The governor called me this morning. They're launching a new review system for the department. It's the first step toward fixing what's broken." She smiled faintly. "I didn't do that." "You did," he shook his head. "No, you gave them a reason to care." The following week, the officer who had wronged her was officially dismissed. The announcement was brief, professional, but it sent ripples through the community. Some were angry, others relieved. For Alana, it brought a quiet sense of closure, not revenge, just peace. On the day the decision became final, she drove out to the edge of town, where the fields opened wide and the horizon stretched endlessly. She stood there for a long time, feeling the wind move through her hair. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. When she got home, her husband was waiting. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "It's over," he whispered. She nodded against his chest. "Maybe, but I don't want it to just end here. I want it to mean something." He smiled softly. "Then make it mean something," and she did. Over the next few months, Alana started speaking at small community events. She talked about empathy, fairness, and the importance of treating people with dignity. Her words weren't angry, they were hopeful. She didn't speak as the sheriff's wife or as a victim. She spoke as a person who had been through pain and found the courage to turn it into purpose. People began to listen. Even officers from nearby towns attended her talks. Some thanked her afterward, saying her story had changed how they saw their jobs. Others just stood quietly thinking. Life slowly returned to normal, but in a new way. The fear that once filled their home was replaced with a quiet strength. Alana and her husband would sit together on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset and talking about the future, not as sheriff and wife, but as two people who had faced the darkness and come out stronger. And though the world around them kept changing, one thing stayed the same: Alana's belief that kindness and courage could heal even the deepest wounds. It wasn't the ending she had imagined. It was something better, a new beginning built not on anger but on truth and hope. Months passed and the town slowly began to settle after everything that had happened. The tension that once filled the streets had started to fade. The protests were gone, the headlines had quieted, and people were returning to their normal lives. But for Alana and her husband, life would never quite be the same again. Something inside them had shifted forever. The sheriff's office was rebuilding. New officers had been hired, and training sessions were held every week to teach fairness, patience, and understanding. Alana's husband was leading it all, but he often said that she was the reason it began. He told her that her courage had changed how people saw things, that she had given the department a reason to look inward and do better. But even as change was happening around them, Alana sometimes found herself thinking about the past. She still remembered that night, the flashing lights, the officer's cold stare, the fear that gripped her chest. It was something she would never fully forget. Yet when she looked back now, she also saw how far she had come since then. One morning she woke up early and went for a walk. The air was cool, the sky soft with the colors of dawn. The streets were quiet except for the sound of birds waking up. As she walked past the diner where she used to work, she noticed something on the bulletin board near the door, a flyer for a community event. It said, "Voices for Change, Stories that Inspire." Underneath, in small letters, it read, "Guest speaker, Alana, sheriff's wife." She froze for a moment, surprised. She hadn't signed up for it. But she smiled when she realized what it meant. Her husband must have told them she'd be perfect for it. That evening, she stood in front of a small crowd at the town hall. The lights were dim and about 50 people filled the seats. Locals, officers, teachers, students. She could see their faces clearly, each one curious and waiting to hear her story. When she stepped up to the microphone, she took a deep breath. Her heart pounded, but her voice came out steady. "I used to be afraid," she began. "Afraid of speaking up, afraid of being seen. I thought that silence would protect me. But silence only protects what's wrong. It never protects what's right." The room was silent, every ear tuned to her words. She continued, speaking slowly with honesty. "I didn't ask to be part of any story. I didn't want attention or pity. I just wanted respect, and when I didn't get it, it broke something inside me. But over time, I learned that when one person stands up, others find their courage too. That's how change begins, not with power, but with people." Her eyes scanned the crowd. Some nodded, others wiped quiet tears. She talked about forgiveness, not the easy kind, but the kind that comes from understanding that anger alone can't heal. She didn't excuse what had happened, but she explained how holding on to hate would only have chained her to the past. When she finished speaking, the audience stood and clapped. Some came up afterward just to thank her, some to share their own stories. A few officers even told her how her words had made them think about their duty differently. That night, when she got home, her husband was waiting for her on the porch, as he often did. The sky was full of stars and a soft wind moved through the trees. "How did it go?" he asked. She smiled. "It went better than I thought. I was nervous at first, but once I started talking, it just felt right." He reached over and held her hand. "I knew you'd be great." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. There was peace between them, something deeper than words. After a while, she turned to him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that night never occurred?" He thought for a moment. "All the time. But then I think, maybe it needed to happen. Maybe it was the only way to open people's eyes. It hurt, but it woke us all up. Alana nodded slowly. It did. It changed everything. The days that followed were calm but busy. Alana kept getting invited to speak at nearby towns, schools, and community centers. She never tried to sound perfect or polished. She just told her story the way it was. People listened because she spoke like one of them, not above them. Meanwhile, her husband continued working on reforms in his department. He spent long hours reviewing policies, checking reports, and making sure fairness was not just a word written on paper, but something felt in every action. He often told his team, "The badge doesn't make us better than anyone else. It gives us the duty to protect, not to control." Some officers left because they couldn't accept the new changes. Others stayed determined to make things better. Slowly, the culture began to shift. Respect replaced fear. Conversation replaced silence. One afternoon, as Alana was helping organize a charity event, she received a small envelope in the mail. It had no return address. She opened it carefully, and inside was a short letter written in uneven handwriting. It read, "I've been thinking about what happened. I can't undo it, but I want to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. There was no name, but she didn't need one. She knew who it was from, the officer who had once humiliated her. Her heart ached as she read the words again. For a long time she sat quietly, letting the emotions wash over her. Then she folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not out of anger but as a reminder of how far she had come. That evening she showed the letter to her husband. He read it carefully, then looked up. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I am. I never needed his apology, but I'm glad he sent it. Maybe it means he's learning too." He smiled gently. "Maybe it does." Months turned into a year and life began to feel normal again, but a new kind of normal, one filled with purpose. Alana opened a small center in town called the Listening Room. It was a quiet space where people could come and share their experiences, no matter who they were. Sometimes officers came, sometimes citizens. Everyone spoke and everyone listened. That was her rule. No shouting, no judgment, just listening. The center grew popular, and before long, people from nearby towns came to learn from what she'd built. Alana never charged anyone. She said healing wasn't something to sell, it was something to share. One evening, as she closed up the center, her husband arrived to pick her up. He leaned against the doorway, smiling as he watched her lock the door. "You've built something special here," he said. She laughed softly. "You say that every time." "Because it's true," he said. "You've given this town more than you realize." They walked together to the car, the sun setting behind them in golden light. The town that had once been divided was now healing step by step, conversation by conversation. Later that night, they sat by the fireplace sipping tea. Alana looked over at him and said, "You know, I used to think that night ruined my life." He looked at her gently. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think it saved it. It showed me who I am. It showed me what I'm capable of." He nodded. "It showed all of us." The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the world was quiet, peaceful, and still. Alana leaned back in her chair, feeling the warmth of the fire on her face. She thought about the journey, the fear, the pain, the truth, and the growth. It had been hard, but it had been worth it. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Sometimes life tests us not to break us, but to remind us of our strength." Her husband reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently, and in that quiet room, with the sound of the fire and the calm of the night, everything felt right. They had faced the storm together, and now finally they were standing in the calm after it, stronger, wiser, and at peace. The story that had once begun with fear had ended with hope. And though life would bring new challenges, Alana knew one thing for sure. She would never again let silence steal her voice.